Welcome to Episode 5 of the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast. The Ministry of Motion Pictures exists to advance the art of Christian film for the glory of God. I'm your host, Todd Schaefer. Have you ever wondered why the church, particularly in Protestantism, has historically had a hands-off position when it comes to the arts and creativity? In our efforts to remain faithful to Scripture, with the exception of music, we seldom engage in or encourage the pursuit of any of the other art forms. And it seems many Christian circles completely reject the arts. And nowhere is this better exemplified than in the cinema. Is there an incompatibility between the arts and theology? My guest in this episode supervises a doctoral program at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary called Christianity and the Arts. His particular focus in this program is a track called Aesthetic Theology. He's professor of philosophy and ethics, and his name is Dr. Mark Coppenger. He's also the managing editor of the Kairos Journal and is on the board of Bible Mesh. He's written a number of books, including Moral Apologetics for Contemporary Christians, For Such a Time as This, and is editor of the book A Skeptics Guide to Arts in the Church. And he also leads my advisory board for Glorious Films. Since Dr. Coppenger spent so much time studying the relationship of aesthetics and theology, in this episode I wanted to tap his thinking on a Christian view of aesthetics and theology before we begin wrestling with the issues of Christian filmmaking. That will be for next week. And to begin, I asked Dr. Coppenger to tell us a little bit about what he's currently working on.
I teach at Southern Seminary up in Louisville. But I also work for a couple of websites out of New York, one called Kairos Journal.org and the other is BibleMesh.com. We have, I think, 10,000 readers, ministers on Kairos in 100 different countries, and Bible Mesh it not only has content, but it's a platform for Zondervan teaching and all kinds of schools like Bethlehem Baptist, and so it's a pretty big concern, yeah. And a new study Bible's coming out. We had one for for Kairos called the Unapologetic Study Bible, and Nelson came out with it, and now we have one called the Storyline Study Bible based on the Bible Mesh biblical story. So anyway.
Tell me a little bit about the program on aesthetics and theology.
Well, there are a few of them, but the doctoral seminar is called Aesthetic Theology, or I prefer Theological Aesthetics. And we're basically just looking at the whole range of aesthetic concerns. I mean, some people like to do their theology using aesthetics. There's a guy named Hans von Balthasar who does that, and then others would just like to bring biblical understanding and theology to bear on how in the world we evaluate art and decide whether Christians are up to good things. One thing that we used about 20 of our students in aesthetics to come out with a book called A Skeptics Guide to Arts in the Church, and we started with 20 really cranky questions about the arts, like aren't artists prima donnas, or too bohemian, or what about the second commandment, or what about the regulative principle, and they just riffed on these questions. So we connected to the church. Also, I mean, the guys doing dissertations do all kinds of interesting stuff. One fellow out in California did one on comparing Jonathan Edwards with Bach, and another one talked about Schopenhauer's view of the arts as Sabbath, and we compared that to the Lord's Day. And anyway, just a lot of interesting things. Another fellow just finished one on kitsch and Tolstoy, the notion of kitsch, or I guess you could say sort of gloppy sentimental art, and Tolstoy's theory of art. And then another guy, actually the grandson of Henry Blackaby, did one on how Darwin has a tough time accounting for sublime literature, how in the world you can get that out of a Darwinian thing. So we're all over the place.
Are these dissertations collected somewhere and published where we can find them?
Some are brand new, some have been around a while. Of course, the University of Michigan publishes all dissertations in America, but the others are very fresh. I mean, these two guys on Tolstoy and then on Darwin, they just were made doctors in December. And so, no, nothing published there yet.
How long has this program been around?
I suppose, I think about 10 years now.
Now, is this a program that you developed at Southern Seminary?
Well, our department or division has a number of these things. One is theology and the arts. That's one of our doctorates, and we have philosophy of religion, we have ethics, and so forth. But yeah, I was in on the ground floor of establishing this particular channel, and it's been a popular one. We have a what's called a modular program where the folks don't have to live in Louisville, but they come to town twice a year for 2 weeks each, and they do a number of seminars. And actually, you're doing the work all through the semester, and you have prelims and comps and a prospectus and a dissertation and a defense. And one guy got through it in 3 years. Typically, it takes closer to 4 after the Master of Divinity, and some take a little longer. But anyway, we've got some good folks in the program right now. One guy has a Doctor of Musical Arts from UT, Texas, and one person this is kind of fun. I'm working with one lady now who's doing something on the influence of a fellow named Harold Best, who the dean of the conservatory at Wheaton when I was teaching there, and I'm working with Harold on helping him with a book manuscript right now. He's retired, but when I heard she wanted to do one on Harold's influence, some deal with literature, some with painting. The guy who did the thing on Tolstoy was a documentary filmmaker in Afghanistan, and they come from all kinds of backgrounds.
Has anyone done a dissertation related to film?
He didn't do one on film. I wish we had one on film. I mean, there was one fellow who talked about the apologetic value of C.S. Lewis's notion of the German word Sehnsucht, kind of longing, and why would God put this sort of longing or northernness in us if He weren't ready to satisfy it? I mean, why would He give us a hunger for, whatever, meat or vegetables if there weren't meat and vegetables? So it's kind of an apologetic, and he used a number of examples from film in it. I mean, he talked about, well, even Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where this guy's just drawn, up to the Devil's Tower, and there's this, he's just obsessed with it, and he's making models on his table in his home, and he's sort of driven. And so, anyway, some use examples, film examples, but we haven't had one that's just really devoted entirely to film.
Now, why are aesthetics something important for Christians to study?
Well, I mean, God has given us these sensitivities, and I think just as we need to be stewards of our physical life and exercise, nutrition, stewards of our rational life and careful thinking, we do have these appetites. I mean, this is a funny way to put it, but when you don't honor aesthetics, like in composing and delivering a sermon, or in some kind of writing a book or whatever, then you fall into boredom. I mean, make a film. It's boring. You check your watch out. You're I said once somebody crammed a 15-minute sermon into 45 minutes. It's seasoning in life. It gives punch to whatever you're trying to persuade someone of, or it's just a wonderful way to unstring the bow that we're just grinding and grinding. I mean, I have to give Schopenhauer a little credit, and there's a lot of grind to life, and he just says it's just really a kind of a tiring, exhausting, vexing kind of world we live in. And I think he got the answer wrong, but he said that in the arts, in music and painting and so forth, we have a kind of rest. And I've even found this, like when I travel someplace and I'll be in a series of meetings or wrestling, trying to find a good place to eat or get a cab or something. If I can go into an art museum and just walk around and just sit and look at some paintings and browse the bookstore, it's a real refreshment. And I think that one of the wonderful things about the arts, and of course with film, that they're just wonderful ways. I don't want to use the word escape, but there is the kind of escape to it. The other night, I took my grandkids. My son and his wife were out on an anniversary, and I took my grandkids to see How to Train Your Dragon, and it was in 3D, the first 3D movie they'd been to. And I wasn't thinking all the way through, like, I can use this in lectures, and this will make me a more incisive column writer, and it'll bake bread and make shoes and so forth. It's just kicking back with my grandkids, and I ended up crying at the end. I mean, come on, here here I'm a grown man, but boy, just the story is quite extraordinary. And my grandkids went to another one about the internet at Christmas. I all treated them to that movie, and you just find yourself in there saying, "Wow, I'm just refreshed. I'm renewed." So there's that.
So, how have we seen aesthetics play out in the life of the church throughout history?
I'm working on a paper for ETS right now on well, some people say there are many more than five senses. I mean, you can have the auditory, gustatory, olfactory, all this sort of stuff, but then internal senses of pain or equilibrium or balance and so forth. But just working with the five senses, the church has been pretty big on sight and sound. So you have the reading of the word, preaching. Whether depending on the tradition you're in, you'll have stained glass windows and baptistry art, and of course you're reading. I mean, there you're using your eyes. But then sometimes we hear it said, maybe in the evangelical tradition, that, oh, those people use smells and bells. And by bells, they don't mean a carol line, but they mean something that's just a little ringing of the bell as you're announcing this change in the service. And then you have incense. And they kind of look down on the tactual, the touch or feel senses. These are kind of the dumb senses that don't carry proposition so well. And then smell and even taste. There are elements of that in the church, but we've majored on the visual and the auditory, and they've all had a run. I mean, certainly in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, you have icons. In Catholicism, you have icons, whereas the Westminster Greater Catechism shoots this down and says, no. The Second Commandment says you can't have any depictions of any member of the Trinity, and so they are very averse to having pictures of Jesus or whatever. I mean, certainly God, like on the Sistine Chapel. So, I mean, there's been some wars, some visual wars as well as music wars. I mean, some people say if it's not in the Psalms, you shouldn't sing it. Others introduce gospel songs, and then you have the whole CCM thing, contemporary Christian music, and like the 7-Eleven deal, like 7 words sung for 11 times or whatever it is. One thing I will mention, I think it's important, and it's playing right now. There's a push to be really taken with what's called the transcendentals. It's like truth, goodness, and beauty, and we're all for truth and we're all for goodness. And we're all for beauty, but aesthetics is a lot more than beauty. A lot of people think, oh, well, that's about beauty, but no. I mean, it something may be magnificently ugly. Something may be very disturbing, and yet be so well crafted that it's an aesthetic success. It's engaging. It's charming. So that's a little hitch I have right now about what some of the people in church are talking about. That they think that the whole topic of aesthetics is beauty. And it's more than that.
As an artist, I would say that aesthetics happens when an artist expresses their experience of the world by crafting it to communicate an impression, a story, or a theme. They're trying to make some sort of statement about the world that they live in a creative way.
No, it's really true. It's just that the crafting, the better the crafting, the more aesthetically laudable it is. I mean, one can drone on and on for an hour in a monotone, and you told the story, but people are drooling and their eyes are heavy and they're falling out of down in the pew or something. So the aesthetic craftsman is one. And by the way, the thing that's so maddening is that some of the very best folks in aesthetics are godless or sub-Christian or anti-Christian, and so you'll see a movie or an ad, and you just think, oh, I hate it that it's so good. The script writing, or we were flipping channels tonight at supper, and happened to be packing. I'm going to Louisville. My wife's going to visit her mom, and anyway, we were watching a little bit of the one about I think it's called Dodgeball with Vince Vaughn and some of those folks, and they're just terrible people, deplorable people, but some of the humor and some of the pacing in that is so good that you think, wow, why couldn't somebody nail that when it comes to a Christian message?
In our next episode, I'll continue my conversation with Dr. Coppenger as we exchange our thoughts about Christian filmmaking. In the show notes, you'll find links to Kairos Journal, Bible Mesh, and a few of Dr. Coppenger's books. There's also a link to the Aesthetic Theology program at Southern Seminary. Thank you for joining us on the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. You'll find links on our website at www.ministryofmotionpictures.org.